My brief in the next 45 to 50 minutes is this: it's to release your energy for sustainability and growth. What a wonderful title on a wet Friday morning in London. And my aim is to sort of look at what I would think are the sort of 3 to 4 major sources of funding for whatever institution you're in, whether it be a college, a local authority, a training provider, the third sector, voluntary sector, higher education, or a school. And I think what is important is to say that this is an interesting time, as Phil said, in terms of Brexit. We've got so much uncertainty, you know, the Rumsfeld known knowns, known unknowns, unknown knowns, and the unknown unknowns. And when it comes to funding, you can actually use all 4 of those to describe the future of funding. So I think there is a sense in which we've got to be quite agile. We've certainly got to understand that whatever institution you come from, the most important financial driver at the moment is cash. And I'm not going to ask any of you to put your hands up who's currently working in an institution that's not got many days of cash in hand, because that number can be quite interesting. You know, sometimes you talk to people who say, well, actually, we no longer have any days cash in hand, but the bank manager is a really good friend to the institution. It's not a good position to be in. And I think that's one of the things maybe to reflect on. How do we make sure that doesn't happen to us? First thing I think you've got to realize is that if you look at post-16 education, the markets are significantly changing. Things have moved on in the last 5 years, the last 10 years, and they will even accelerate in the next 5 years. If you have a vision of 2025, what will be happening in each one of these markets for learning? Whether it be young people, demography starting to pick up. You know, we've gone through a significant dip, but we've got the future of T-levels creating some uncertainty. We've got a review of the funding of that coming along. But we also have major issues still, and that is that not every young person who's 16 to 18 is actually participating. So we've still got to fill those gaps, particularly from disadvantaged backgrounds, and also even if they do participate, they don't necessarily participate for as long as they could benefit from. We've got issues about progression for young people, and then when you push this forward into adults, and many of you here work predominantly with adult learners, is what's going to happen in the future with adult learning. We know that we've got devolution, we've got the issues around whether that devolution will be a success or not. We're uncertain about how the model's going to work, whether it be London, Greater Manchester, Liverpool, or whichever devolved area, but the majority of people are not in devolved areas. So what's going to happen to the future of adult funding, which has been static now, if you think about it, at £1.5 billion for the last 5 years. So, you know, about 3 million adults currently are being serviced by that funding, but the average number of hours that these adults are doing is quite low, actually. And that obviously does create another set of pressures. Those of you that know anything about apprenticeships, I'll move on very quickly, because you get headache every time you talk about them. Apprenticeships are an unmitigated, unrelenting success story. Okay? Trust me, I'm a consultant. Well, they are, because we're going to overspend the budget. That's fascinating. We might actually overspend the apprenticeship budget by £500 million. And yet the number of adults, that's including young people at 16 to 18, actually participating in apprenticeships is down. So, of course, the main reason is, and I bet you there's people in this room, you're all now on a leadership apprenticeship, you know, funded at £27,000, hopefully an MBA with it. And that's obviously one of the big issues. We've actually taken the mantle and the challenge of apprenticeships and actually doing a very lot of high-priced apprenticeships. And yet the biggest demand is still at level 2. And they're not funded at the same levels. And those of you working with adults doing level 3 and above programs, the whole of the future is tied up to loans. There's some figures coming out on, this is the first year that the demand for loans has actually fallen. But the demand, by the way, was never high in the first place. So we've actually gone backwards on loans. And obviously we've got the review of post-18 education and what's going to happen to funding rates and fee rates in higher education, which of course many of our learners are progressing to. So if you look at these, there's a lot of risks associated to each one of these markets. Now, I bet you a fair number of you in this room, you operate in all 4 markets, and you make provision to all 4 markets. What's also happening is the actual nature of what we're offering to those markets is changing. We have talked about online learning and the importance of using blended learning many times. We still have a problem in this country in actually getting people to participate and to start to undertake some of that. But why? Because very often those foundation skills that are needed for digital skills are not there. So we've got a big job to do there. We've got 2 levels. And I'm not going to ask you, you're all totally motivated and keen to be involved in T levels? Yeah? Yeah? Have any of you got the pain of 14 to 19 diplomas still hanging over you? There's a couple of people already really depressed, thinking I was hoping to be, excited by the future. Well, T levels, well on in terms of the funding model. That's being consulted on, and I'll refer briefly to it. But we've also got the shift from frameworks to standards. That's a major curriculum change. When you actually look at the apprenticeship reforms, it's the single biggest change in curriculum for adult learning for a significant number of years. And the move to standards, most people have not really grasped the significance, because the significance is knowledge, understanding, behaviors, and skills. It's not about an assessment-only model. And I think that is a big challenge for apprenticeship providers. I'm just reflecting on, in my own institution, I'm a governor, like Phil, of a college, but also a director of 2 training companies. The biggest challenge for us is our workplace assessors are not qualified teachers. And that means we've got a massive CPD challenge. How are we going to improve the skill levels of our own staff, considering what's happening with the move from frameworks to standards? You've got the importance of traineeships. Unfortunately, the government thinks they're important, but hardly any providers think they're important. It is not a good success story with traineeships. Maybe we should have just called them pre-apprenticeships. And I think you can see also other things that are happening there. Higher education has got to be addressed in terms of what's happened to the number of part-time adults. Have you seen the data? It is not promising. In effect, ever since the introduction of the loans and a lot of other behaviors, the number of adults participating in part-time higher education has actually gone down by 50%. That's a scandal. Now, are we going to address that through the higher apprenticeships, through the degree apprenticeships? And we've got a bigger issue, of course, and that is, and even Damon Hines has actually grown in my estimation in the last 2 days, because he said that technical education is equal to academic education. He just needs to tell Oxford and Cambridge that. Or if you want to study divinity at Durham, I don't know if having a T level in catering will necessarily open those doors for you. It should do, shouldn't it? So, what's happening to funding? As I said, cash is critical, so you've got to make sure that in your organisation... Now, I'm not suggesting that the first thing you do when you get back on Monday is go to your finance director and say, Beej said that cash flow is critical. Can you just tell me how many days cash in hand we've got? Why? Because I want to know if I'm going to be paid at the end of the month. Or, if I'm using Ascentis, can I actually pay Ascentis the cost of registration and enrollments, yeah? It's very critical. And I'm totally fixated on this because it's easy for your cash to disappear quite quickly. Just small downturn in learners. If you've got, say, for example, 200 less 16 to 18-year-olds next year, that's 200 at an average of 4,500, that's £900,000. Now, I know that you'll take out £450,000 of costs because you're all living in the real world. It still means you're 450,000 short. So that's not a good position. Think about that every time. I love it when staff say to me, oh, it's great, I've only got 10 in the class. I love it. I used to have 15. It's so much easier. Excuse me, 15 is needed to pay your wages. 10 doesn't pay your wages. So we've got to understand that the dependence on public funding is something that we're going to have to move ourselves away from. The theme is sustainability, isn't it? It's about future-proofing. We cannot future-proof if we're 100% dependent on public funding. Most education and training systems don't have that high dependence. Why? Because once we've taken out the 16 to 18 who are fully funded, the 19 to 24 who are fully funded if they've got an education healthcare plan or if they're in care or care leavers, actually the only other group of fully funded learners are your adults, 19 to 23, who are doing first level 2, first level 3, English and maths, and from 2020, digital skills. I hope you're all fixated on digital skills, are you? Good? What we therefore need is to see in colleges and training providers and local authorities, all providers, a much more entrepreneurial spirit. When I first came into FE I went to a college called Sheffield College, and we had 70% of our funding came from public sources, 30% came from fees. That's less than 5% in many colleges now. So we need to get back into this thing about if people value education and training and they are able to pay, we're going to have to get more from them. Now, we've got that with apprenticeships, because levy payers are using the levy to pay us, and we've got non-levy paying employers hopefully paying us 10% of the cost of the training. I think any reduction in the employer contribution below 10% devalues education and training. I think there are some mistakes being made here. People who pay for something will have a value attached to it. Remember what happened to retention after ESOL? We introduced fees for ESOL. It actually improved. But of course, we've got to make sure that the safeguards are there and the safety nets are there for those people that can't afford those fees. Loans are going to stay, but they need to be reviewed. The quality of some of the loan providers is poor. You've heard these terrible stories about people being left with no training provider because they've gone bankrupt. They were totally dependent on loan-funded activity. Their inspection grades are not good. In fact, the majority requires improvement or inadequate. So there's some big issues about loan funding. We need to get that quality bit sorted out. People will pay and will take out a loan of £3,500 for a level 3 diploma if it's good quality and if they know that that provider is going to be there. Now, they'll repay the loan out of their future earnings. That's the theory. Although we have a lot of people who say, not going to have any future earnings, I'm going to be self-employed. Well, I know what that means, but that's another issue. But we need to increase the demand for loan-funded provision while those loans are there. At the moment, the underspend is almost 50%. So each year, the facility, which is about 480 million, we only use about half of it. And that's actually gone down in the last year. How many of you here are apprenticeship providers? Are you really, yeah, good. And I think one of the things about this is that if you want to look for sustainability, the whole model of apprenticeships is going to have to be rethought. I think the reforms in terms of curriculum were good. I think the funding model is actually flawed. And the best example of that is, in the first few months of the levy, we did really well out of levy payers because we'd worked with them for about 18 months before saying, do not give up 0.5%. For you, it's £20,000. For you, it's £200,000. Which do a training needs analysis. Let's find out who's not got the basic qualifications. And we did well, but that seems to have just dried up. And in fact, what we've had is a significant fall in the numbers, but an increase in the average value of each apprentice, particularly as they're moving to those apprenticeships in degrees and in management and leadership. And the most frustrating thing is, we've been working with a public sector organisation, right, central government department, where some of the staff were mandated to come on the apprenticeship whether they liked it or not. Now, can you imagine the risk you take when an inspector comes into the room and meets some of the apprentices and says, how do you feel your apprenticeship's going? And they go, I was saying, are you really enjoying it? No, I'm doing the things I already know. You must be getting some benefit from it. Yeah, it's a day off work. Well, at least you got the 20%. Thank God we can make something positive out of that. That is not a good model. And I'm sure those of you who are levy payers in this room, I would think the majority of you, if you're coming from colleges, you are levy payers, that you are setting a fine example of how to spend the levy in a strategic... Some of you going, I've been mandated today, actually counts as part of my apprenticeship. Thank you. So we've got a major transition in the curriculum, frameworks which were assessment-based, unit by unit. There was no holistic, replaced by standards, which are all about formative assessment, are about endpoint assessment, are about knowledge, understanding, skills, and behaviours. What's happening clearly is that more decisions are now being devolved to individuals through the loan, through fees, and that's already happened in higher education. More decisions are being devolved to individual employers through the levy or through co-investment. Small employers only have to find 10% of the cost of the training, but it's going to be 10% in cash. and, of course, devolution to those local enterprise partnerships and combined authorities. So a lot less decisions are being made at the centre. So here's the first challenge for you to take away. Whatever role you've got in your organisation, does your organisation understand that? And is it actually, therefore, creating what I'd call an engagement strategy for each set of devolved decision makers? Where's your individual learner engagement strategy? How are you branding yourself? How are you promoting yourself? Are you in a strong... Is your sort of brand, your values, etc., have they got a strong place in the mind's eye of potential learners? Think about all your level 1 learners, your entry learners who might be doing ESOL. How many of those have now got a very positive impression of yourself, who are saying, I'm not going to leave you, I'm going to stay with you now to get my level 1, and then I'm going to get my functional skills at level 2, then I'm going to do a thumping big diploma, then I'm going to access into HE, and then I'm going to do HE, part-time with you, funded by a loan. And then I'm going to bequeath a seat to you, or a chair. It's actually a chair, but up north we call it a seat, right? How many of you got learners like that? How many of you have got employers that swear by your name in a positive way? Or just go... How many of them say, do you know, I'm glad I'm working with that training provider. They've changed everything about this business. We could not be successful without them. And again, think about those communities that say that about you. Those community groups, your third sector, the voluntary sector. What do they say about you that tells you that you've got that engagement right, as well as engagement with higher education and other stakeholders? So for young people, the key thing here is, we know that the number of young people has fallen over the last 10 years. The numbers are now starting to pick up. It's flattened in some areas, but it's picking up. And that obviously is going to be helpful to some of you, because if you just maintain the same percentage of the market, you actually have more learners. And don't forget, 10 more young people is a minimum of 45 grand that comes into your organisation. Just think what that means. But there's a lot of competition for those 10, right? Because some of you are in competition with schools, others are in competition with academies. Some of you have taken over the competition. I bet some of you run multi-academy trusts. There's now a much bigger demand from alternative providers. Look at the numbers going into places like NACRO, because they want to go into a smaller provider that's more personalised, that's not a big, big institution. I asked a taxi driver once, what's your perception of an FE college? And he said, it's a building with loads of windows. And I said, actually, it isn't. That's the hospital next door, right? But then I said, well, what kind of people go to the college? And he said, well, it's like my kids. If they're not good at A-levels, they go to the college. Well, see, that's a perception. And we've got to change those perceptions. So we've got the same issue with young people coming out at Key Stage 4. And are they choosing you? The beta, you all know about the Baker Clause. This is the clause that was introduced that says schools must inform parents and children in the last 2 years of their education about the opportunities that are available outside the school sixth form. And it's compulsory, it's mandatory. Ofsted monitors it. Are you all benefiting from this? Are you getting students with 10 GCSEs, A-star, coming to you now saying, I'm glad the Baker Clause is here, because I didn't know you existed. I didn't know I could do a level 3 diploma with you, or A-levels or whatever. However, one big issue, despite all the campaigning, the average level of funding for a 16 to 90-year-old in our sector is still £4 grand. Now, since 2010, has there been any inflation? Have cost of living risen? Yeah. Sounds like a plea for the Scottish Nationalist Party here. So who caused that? In Scotland, it was the SNP. That's okay. But that's 540 to 600 hours. That's the same rate as we got in 2010. It's not the same rate as we got in 2005. It's a real terms reduction, and therefore the only way you can maintain that cash flow is by increasing your class numbers. So average class sizes are now rising from about 14.4 to about 14.6. It's a dramatic increase, right? By the way, don't quote that figure. It's just made up just to get that dramatic impact. But it's still not very high, right? Now, the other thing that's there is that we've still got a condition that says everyone that's come out of Key Stage 4 that hasn't got English and maths, they've got to have another go, whether they like it, another go. And that condition still applies. By the way, it doesn't apply in T levels, because in the T level, you cannot complete the T level without doing English and maths. So it's not a condition of funding, it's a compulsory part of the actual program. But we still have problems with young people leaving schools that haven't got a level 4 to 9 in English and maths. And therefore you, as providers, have got to do it, and if you don't, you lose the funding for those learners outside a tolerance. And that tolerance is quite generous. So we've got extra money now for getting ready. How many of you here are involved in T levels in the pilots or the pathfinders? Right, so that's really good. There's 50 colleges and schools going to be involved. Most of you are getting some funding for finding better work placements and resourcing better work placements. Why? Because on the T levels, the work placement is a minimum of 45 days, a maximum of 60. Now, I bet you, if many of you who are working in general FE or sixth form colleges, you'll be struggling to get 5 days, of a high quality work placement. So there's some extra money to give you the capacity to do that, and there's some exciting work there. There's also extra money for maths and English teaching, because we've realized that there's a massive shortage of skill in those areas, and we're looking for different. So there's new CPD programs in maths teaching in particular, and of course there's the level 3 maths premium, if you're able to increase the number of young people who are doing a level 3 A-level or core maths or further maths, and that extra money of about £800 per learner is there to sort of act as an incentive payment. We've got the introduction of T levels, and watch out for the stuff that's coming along as we introduce the new pathfinders into the new 7 areas. But I think we've got a major issue here with T levels, and that is that finding the employers to actively engage in designing the curriculum is proving quite difficult, because they have to understand our language, but we have to understand their language, and they don't use EduSpeak. So when you're trying to translate what an employer is seeking from a level 3 learner, particularly if they're going to progress into a higher apprenticeship or into an institute of technology, then you have to be careful about the language you use. But there is a significant set of issues around how those T levels are going to be designed. The Gatsby benchmarks you're all aware of. Everyone in this room, post-16, you have to, by 2020, implemented the Gatsby benchmarks. That's the 8 benchmarks for high-quality career education, information, and advice and guidance. Word of warning. I've been to a few institutions where they're all right, well, that's great, we're well on with it. The team over there is doing it. And I said, what's the team over there? Student services. The careers lot. They're seeing to it. Fatal flaw. All of you in this room, are you all involved in curriculum? Are you all involved in the delivery of teaching and learning? Yeah? Every one of you has got to understand Gatsby. Because your curriculum has got to have in it all the different opportunities and occasions when you talk to the person, whether it be an adult or a young person, but predominantly at the moment it's young people, about, this is the right course for you. Are you still determined to become a paleontologist or a philosopher or a psychologist or a physicist? Are you sure this is right? Have you had the opportunities that might be available outside of that pathway? Have you had a good work placement? What's your understanding of higher education? And you've got to keep on coming back to that through the curriculum, not through the team over there that's called the careers team. So please remember that. That's a key aspect of this. One size doesn't fit all for young people, and I think we're now clear that there's got to be much more. One of the problems that's disappointing about study programs, the 16 to 19, the funding's there, but it's what is actually the quality of what we get for that £4,500. And that's not been brilliant. It's getting better. We're getting more grade 2s than we had before. But at one time, the average grade was between 2 and 3. So it was closer to requires improvement, in the first inspections across the sector. So it's got to be much more personalised. Who's the biggest provider of study programs in the room? Anyone got over 2,500, 16 to 18s in their institution? Anyone got over 2,500? You have. You have, yeah? That's 2,500 individual programs. That's the way you've got to think about it. It's not about quals. It's about how does the whole thing come together holistically, a bit like an apprenticeship standard or a T level, and then what's the progression from it? And your job is to maximize those progressions. The elements are common, but the emphasis must be different for each learner. So the learner comes in. We did an event recently on pre-entry ESOL, didn't we? And one of the providers there had almost, was it over 200 pre-entry ESOL 16 to 18-year-olds on a study program. And I said, well, that's how diverse it can be. If that young person has come from another country where maybe education wasn't developed, then you have to have a pre-entry ESOL program, and that will be your core program. You build IT, you build maths around it. Oh yeah, could you have a study program at pre-entry level? Of course you can. It's not just at level 3 and level 2. It's whatever's appropriate to that young person as part of the entitlement. And you've got to have that appropriate combination of qualification and non-qualification time. So you know what's inside a study program. That's what the £4,500, £5,000, £6,000 pays for. For example, if you're doing something like land-based or engineering, the prices are higher. But the key thing here is all those elements have got to be in it, right? So it could be core learning and IT, but you've got to have English or ESOL if it's required, maths, enrichment, work experience, and then you've got to have wrapped into it careers, education, information, advice, and guidance. The key driver here is, for that £4,500 to £5,000, is the learner achieving the destination? Have they progressed to employment, to apprenticeships, to higher education? And that, increasingly, is going to be a feature of the new inspection framework. Are you all excited by it? Impact. How many of your young people have progressed to apprenticeships? Will be a new performance indicator. Not just about progression to university or HE. Get that one right. Where's the employability skills in your offer? Is it embedded all the way through? Where's your digital skills? This sounds like a promotion for Ascentis qualifications, doesn't it? But you have to have those. Because for a lot of young people, seeing a technical route has got to be seen as equivalent, if not better, than some of the other academic routes. So if you want to future-proof your study programs, you need to either maintain your position in the market or increase it. And that means make your offer really different. What makes your offer so exciting that young people are, I've got to go to that place. I'd be daft not to go there. Or my parents think it's the best outcome for me. I've got to go there. Make sure it's all linked together. Make sure every student's inducted. These are all quality indicators. I know it's about funding, but can I just add, you will not secure your funding if your reputation and quality is questionable. The market is quite sophisticated. Young people at 16 make tough decisions, and so do their parents and guardians. And if you don't have that depth, if you don't have that holistic approach, if you've not seen this as a whole institution, management of change and leadership of change, you're not going to be doing well out of that. Adults, well, as I said, it's not good news because basically it's still 1.5 billion. A lot of that is going into the, entitlements, the first level 2, the first level 3, English and maths. But also remember that there are some wonderful opportunities for growth. I'm really frustrated sometimes when someone, I work for another organisation, I've got colleagues here, where we sometimes get these phone calls, don't we? We get a phone call sort of around Christmas time saying, can you get someone to come in? We're about £1 million short on our adult education, and we really could do with your help in finding some students. Or can you help us to become better at marketing ourselves to the adult market? I mean, the underspend on adult education can vary between about 50 million and 100 million. Last year it was about 73 million. Now that, to me, is just, is the demand there? The answer is, it's there. It is. Have you actually understood? I was working with an adult community learning provider who continuously runs short of AEB. Constantly has more learners than they've got money for. So they have to go for growth bids, or they try and get it from another partner that's not. And I said, well, what's your secret of your success? It's called outreach. Does that sound familiar to some of you? I said, how good's your outreach? Brilliant. Our position in the community is such that we are the #1 provider of education. Not just a second chance or return to learn, we're the first choice for everything we do. Now that is a very strong position in the adult market, isn't it? And the danger is some of us have not seen that in fact the community and the wider community can have a whole range of needs. It's not just about return to learn, it's not just about basic skills. Are you fulfilling the progression demands of some people? Because once they are comfortable with you, they like you and they'll stay with you. For us, adult retention is the #1 agenda. Once we get, it sounds terrible, once we get an adult, we don't let them go. But to some extent, yeah, because we've not explored all of their different needs and demands, particularly if you're looking for progression. So we've got to make sure it's not just about qualifications, it's also about those wider things. How many of you are still using non-regulated qualification programs, non-accredited programs? Good, because under flexibilities, more is needed. Why? For a lot of adults, a qual itself can be a barrier. Once you've got that non-accredited experience, then they come in and then they've got a hunger for quals, haven't they? But what you need is a good quality assurance framework around that. And of course, we can help you with RAPL. What you've got coming is devolution in Greater London. How many of you here are Greater London providers? Keep your hands up if you're also Greater Manchester. Anyone from Liverpool? Anyone from Peterborough and Cambridge? Anyone from the southwest? You're good. You're all, so about half the room is going to be affected by devolution. That's why we'll move on to that very quickly. Do not underestimate the local flexibilities bit. I often meet providers and say, well, we've done all the engagement stuff with the legal entitlements, the first level 2, the first level 3, 19 to 23. We work with Job Centre Plus. We do a lot of stuff with unemployed adults over the age of 24. We do the discretion bit. We work with low wage. You've got that. I said, well, what about your local flexibilities? What's that? These are programs that you can put on in response to what you've met and found from your outreach work. And it doesn't have to be a full qualification. It can lead to a full qualification. It might lead to an award. It might lead to a certificate. But the most important thing is, the demand is there, put it on. Oh, right. And we had a couple of events recent where some of people came along, didn't know that we could use Z codes. Do you remember? Do you all know Z codes? You know, the general, the classification? Of course you can, under the local flexibilities. And we've had, in our area, which is Sheffield City region, we've had demand from the LEP for non-accredited programs, but a proportion of those learners have got to move on to ESOL, or to functional skills, or to employability skills. So there is a lot of funding available if you can actually understand what the local market is telling you. So there's your entitlements, which you're all familiar with. A little point, by the way, I had a query from someone who says, we've got adults who have managed to get a grade 1 or 2 on GCSE. Is that the end? The answer is no. The entitlement allows an adult to be fully funded, in other words, don't charge them a fee of £811, right up to the point where they acquire the grade 4 to 9. Right? So I think with some adults, they'll still be doing that when they're 87, won't they? Just one more go. I started when I was on a study program, and I'm still here. These are the local flexibilities. Have a little look at whether your institution has actually taken advantage of the local flexibilities. We had a lot of questions, didn't we, Lindsay? Do we have to ask permission? No. Well, how do we use the AB for a local flexibility? Because you've identified a local demand. And as long as you check with the awarding body if that qual counts for the local flexibility, because it usually will be, an entry or level 1, it's usually an award or certificate, then put it on. Put it on if you've got enough learners. In some cases, though, you actually get a request from the LEP or the combined authority which says, we'd like you to put on something specifically in this area. Why? It's a skill shortage. So it would be health and social care. It could be it often is in language, so it's ESOL, English and maths. Or it could be a very specific need. For example, the needs for entry-level qualifications in food production, for example. So there's the local flexibilities. Go back and ask whoever's managing your AB, how much of this are we doing? Because the most frustrating thing is, if you're giving money back to the ESF8 because you haven't met your allocation or your procurement, then you haven't been using enough of the local flexibilities. How many of you are going to put on a new adult offer in January? Put your hands up. Good. How many of you, keep your hands up if you're also going to do that in April? Good. You understand. For me, AEB is a continuous flow of activity. And we've got learners that start sometimes at the beginning of July. Now, they don't finish at the end of July. Oh, you have to finish at the end of July. Why? It's the end of the funding year. Excuse me, most learners don't have a clue what the funding year. They just know, I start in July and kind of finish just in time for Christmas. And the answer is, yes. You go across 2 funding years, that's not an issue. Why? Because we are responsive, we are demand-led. And I find it frustrating when ESOL learners are told to wait, because they won't. So I think that's a real test. If you want to look at the future, look at things like agility and flexibility as well. So make the most of the legal entitlements, the local flexibilities. Adjust the offer. If Job Centre Plus, how many of you work with Job Centre Plus? Put your hands up. Aren't they great to work with? Right? I think your relationship with your local job centre manager is one of the key relationships in your life. And of course, once you get that relationship right, and once you've got the quality right, guess what? They'll keep on coming back. Can you just run a little course on employability for 8 people? Bit hard to reach. They've just come out of jail, but I think you'll work well. You've got a lot of experience with them. And you think, all right, yeah, well, that's not. What's the outcome? The outcome is just keep them for 4 weeks and make sure they've got some portfolio. You know what I'm talking about. But I think it's hard work, but it's that type of relationship that you need to have. That means get the right offer, and the right offer also means don't make the programs too long. I'm still seeing ESOL programs that start in September and finish in July. All kinds of things can happen in that person's life, can't they? So have some sort of flexibility there. And if you can get more in fee paying, I would say try your best. Don't be embarrassed by asking an adult for a fee, partly because it shows that you're selling quality, and partly it gets that commitment. But of course, it's got to be appropriate to the situation that your adults find themselves in. The other big frustration is, and the funding model was predicated on a certain proportion of adults being funded to do blended learning. I still think we've got a major issue in this country. My daughter works for a company that's just been given significant national prizes for being the Digital Learning Platform of the Year. That's Good Things Foundation. I don't know if any of you come across my daughter, Aniela. And what she's been in Australia. Now, I know Australia is different from here. But of course, blended learning works really well when you've got distance, isn't it? Now, I would suggest that the distance from Hartlepool to Middlesbrough is quite significant if you haven't got a car, and the bus service is not brilliant. But you can access learners all over Britain and all over, I said, England in particular, by using blended learning, by using that type of platform. But it's access that's important. Everyone's got to be able to access it. And that is another issue, particularly when you look at the problems that we might have experienced yesterday when O2 went down. Many of you were not able to buy your Christmas presents. Not terrible, right? I just thought on the train, I couldn't cope, yeah. I had to speak to people yesterday. That's why I was listening to these 2 people, and they said, I actually had to speak to someone rather than just simply text them. I thought, there is a course there in how to speak, I think. Right? Making the best use of partnerships and subcontracting. Work with the right people. Those of you particularly working in adult community learning, you already know it's important to manage the stakeholders on the health and welfare agenda, the agenda for troubled families, working with migrant communities, working with people displaced or the furthest away from learning. That has got to be the model, and especially when you look at what the combined authorities are saying. Why? Because they don't want to see a long tail of very small providers. That's one of the risks of devolution. So, if you're a small provider, get together with a bigger provider that shares your values, and that will give you, I think, some safeguarding and some future-proofing. But most importantly, see this as a continuous flow of activity. Adult learners don't work to academic years. Your AB should be producing all kinds of opportunities for growth, to employment, to apprenticeships. I would have every single manager of adult education telling me every year, how many of your adults have progressed to a higher level program at level 2 or level 3? How many have gone on to higher education? Well, I get that from my access to HE, which we'll be looking at this morning. How many of my adults are now progressed to employment? How many have got a job with a training? And I think we've got to have that greater focus on those outcomes. That's because devolution will take you into this area of outcomes. Those of you in Greater London, those of you in Manchester, Peterborough, West, Liverpool, you have already got well on with this. The West Midlands, you've got on well on with it. What you've got to realise is that $1.5 billion, chunks of it are now being allocated for 2019-20 to the municipal combined authorities and GLA. So those are the ones that we're going to be. You can see that Sheffield City region, where I'm from, yeah, couldn't get it right. And the north of Tyne still can't get it right. But I'm sure we'll eventually plug ourselves in. And that's affecting about, a third of the population of England who are going to be looking for these opportunities. Now, again, if you're future-proofing your provision, plug yourself in to these different, what we call skill strategies. This is the one from City of Liverpool. Can you see the themes? Are you all comfortable with those themes? Could you deliver to 16 to 24-year-olds? Yeah? Could you deliver adult employability skills? Yeah? Could you deliver sector-specific actions, for example, in catering, hospitality, IT, health and social care? By the way, in every combined authority, health and social care is a priority. I wonder why. Right? Brexit. Could any of you build something around digital skills? Yeah? English and maths? ESOL. Sitting in there. Can you see all of that? That's just one example. Those of you in Greater Manchester, those of you in Greater London will have seen the specific requirements there. There are big benefits. I think the one benefit I can see from devolution, other than, of course, they've just devolved austerity to a local level, is, because there's no extra money, is actually it gets us back to what I think adult community learning was very much about. And that's that getting local flavour and not just following a national strategy or a national funding policy. The key thing here about this is, I think it will re-energise ACL, adult community learning. How many of you are ACL providers? It's going to re-energise us. But we have to be in the right partnerships. So I think that's critical. We mustn't, if anything, see this as individual funding flows. What they're doing is bringing European Social Fund in its current form. They're bringing DWP, they're bringing the health and welfare agendas, the troubled families, and putting it into one pot. So this really welcomes an integrated approach to dealing with those particular communities and their needs, particularly furthest away from learning. But don't ignore the last point here. If you look at both Greater London and Greater Manchester as two examples, yes, we need that base level at entry in level 1. But we've also got big skill shortages at level 3 and above. So in London, for example, IT, media, creative and cultural, and advanced manufacturing. Greater Manchester, again, a lot of those. But a need right across the whole country is higher level hospitality skills, for example. Chefing. So what we need to do is not ignore that aspect of the adult market. If you're wanting to future-proof, it's not just about basic skills. It's not just about employability skills. It's those higher-level skills as well. And if they can be funded through loans, that's even better. So just watch out. But I think this is going to give us some really exciting, innovative projects. For example, London is doing quite a lot on digital skills, which I think is really innovative stuff, which is going to push us into 2025 rather than just look back to 2018. If you're a loan-funded provider, yeah, it's a different market altogether. Loan-funded learners have got different expectations because they still see themselves as basically parting with $3,500 if they're paying for an access diploma, right? If they're not getting that through their entitlement, right? So think about this. It's a very different relationship. They see it as a purchasing relationship. It's deferred or no through the loan. And of course, access is one big advantage, isn't it? If they complete the access program and then progress to HE and complete HE, whatever level they go in, the access loan is written off. That's the only area that it's allowed, by the way. Right? That's the only subject area at the moment. And don't forget, you can have up to 4 loans at the same time. We have got one adult in one of my centres who's got 3 loans at the moment. No intention of repaying any of them. I said, well, what happens when you have to repay them? I'll just move to Australia. Right? There you are, with my daughter. Right. The growth, I think, can I just say, I actually do not understand. We continuously have to go for growth of our loans facility because we have waiting lists. And particularly at level 3 in beauty and in hospitality, we have waiting lists. So we've got more learners than we've got actually loan funding for. So I think we've done something really well. But the big demand is now level 4 to 6. So after a while, people have got a level 3 are saying, what's next? Can I do a level 4? I'm not wanting to go into HE. I'd prefer to stay with you and do a level 4 to 6 program, and I don't want to go into management. Because very often you'd say, here's a diploma in management. No, no, no. I want to stay in hair, I want to stay in beauty, or I want to stay in hospitality, but I want a level 4 outcome. I want to stay in health and social care, but I want a level 4. I don't want to go into management. So we have got a demand, I think, for awarding bodies to respond to that. But the big issue is, loans have got to be integrated into your offer, and you've got to see a whole range of other things coming out here. The most important thing that we found for loan-funded learners is it's got to be on their terms. So if a loan-funded learner says to you, I'm going to do a level 3 diploma with you, can you do it short? I want to do it in 18 weeks. Why? Because I've got an opening just now. I can do 3 days with you for the next 18 weeks. Is that on? You have to respond and say, well, yeah, we'll sort that one out for you. And I want 2 of those. I want to do 2 of those days in the evening. And I'm quite happy to give you my study week when I can do a Monday to a Friday. In fact, I might do a Monday to the following Sunday. So can I do it on Saturday and Sunday? These are loan-funded learners. So here's a classic one. We've had that recently. Access to HE students who have actually tailored their program so it now includes a lot more Saturday and Sunday. Because they can do quite intensive work Saturday and Sunday. Someone else looks after the kids and it doesn't cost. Right? So a partner looks after the kids. We don't do it in a college, we do it in a hotel because the college won't open for one class. I wonder if that sounds familiar. Caretaker, no. So we just use a local hotel, which is empty on Saturday and Sundays if it doesn't have a wedding or a bar mitzvah. So great way of using a hotel, which also makes the adult feel a little bit special. So those are the sort of questions. We actually have a large number of adults who are saying, I've loved working with you, can I come and work for you? So we are now adding on assessor and the new workplace mentor qual, which hasn't yet been worked out at the rate that we want. With apprenticeships, just watch out. I think this whole marketplace is about to implode for the reasons I've said. There's big issues about funding, there's big issues about the lack of demand, there's employers now saying, what was this all about? And despite the fact that we've had a big curriculum change, a lot of people still don't understand that it is about teaching, learning, and not just about assessment. We've got a bigger demand now at higher level. Actually, it's the higher level apprenticeships that are growing, but from a very lower base, from 25, 30,000 possibly to 45, 50,000. That's still small relative to the 380,000 or so starts that we have each year. The problem also is, and we work with an employer called DHL, which doesn't understand why there's a different system in Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England. It says, well, we have staff all over the UK. Who invented this system? Someone did. And also, we've got the big problem, the 20% off the job. Now, that is a curriculum issue. It's also a sales issue. If you go to an employer and you're saying, by the way, there's the standard, it's not in a framework, well, I don't understand that. Or we need to have access to your learner, to your apprentice for 20% of their week. And then, by the way, that's not English and maths. And they're saying not as politely as what you've just said, but they're making it difficult. Now, we've brainstormed with employers in big meetings how we can actually deliver 20%. And actually, we're finding less opposition. Initially, we did, but I think it's just understanding it in a different way. The register of apprenticeship training providers is open. Everyone in this room who's an apprenticeship provider, you're going to have to go through the process again. Why? Because some people got through in the past who were of not good quality. That's another one. Yeah, good. They weren't very good. Some of them. And then we've had some major falls in this sector, haven't we? So look out for those things. What successful providers have done, they've done all of those things. They've revisited the basic offer. They've branded themselves differently. They've engaged with employers. And Mike will be looking at employer engagement becoming employer involvement. We've taken on a lot of Mike's ideas about involving the employers in the design and delivery of the apprenticeships that their staff are doing. And that's hard work. But I think we've also got to make sure that we adjust everything that we do. We have an effective pricing and payment strategy. and we get the employers actively involved. And it's hard work. But we're dead lucky. As a college governor, we've got about 5,000 apprentices. And we've got a very good business development team, a good sales team, a good call centre, with all the support systems we need there. So, what does this mean? It means that when you look at all those funding flows, you've got to understand, whichever markets you're in, what's happening in those markets. Can you grow some of them, right? Have you done your outreach? Is your marketing effective? And I don't mean the marketing team. I don't mean that. I mean everyone that works in your organization. Do they understand the values that you're trying to pursue and deliver regularly? I always like to say that I went into a college recently, one of our partner colleges, and the reception staff personified every value that mission statement says. They were courteous, they knew who I was, they were inquisitive, they were creative in the answer when the principal wasn't in the room they should have been in. I thought that was excellent. But the most important thing is they made me feel very important, right? So and it was the same with the catering staff, the reception staff. Your institution has got to be able to realize that when you talk about the curriculum is everything that a person experiences about you. Not just what happens in the classroom. It's reception. It's when they go to finance, if they can't get the grant sorted out. Where's the childcare? You promised me childcare. All of those things. Is the car park any good? Is it safe? All these issues are absolutely critical. Please try and get your organization to think differently in terms of that creativity, because what I think is interesting is, and most likely you're here, you're creative, is that to some extent we've hammered out the creativity and innovation in our sector. And I'd love to go back to the 1980s when we used to do things that were exciting and no one was looking over your shoulder waiting you for it to fail. It was good. There were the good times. Quite a lot of you going. For the younger members of the audience, this was actually, it did happen. Don't read about it in books. So we've got to get the quality right, build improvement into everything you do. Every time you think, that's been a brilliant lesson, yeah, I made that even more brilliant. We used to have an expression at network training, right? There's only one type of brilliance, pure, dead brilliant. That's a Scottish expression for excellence. But that means we're going to invest in staff. And the model of, if you want to future-proof your organization, the first thing your organization is going to have to realize, it cannot do anything without its staff. And this is the last thing you sometimes hear now. As a governor, we totally fixate now on saying, what have we just done to our staff? Have we improved the morale? We have not paid our staff a pay increase in the last 5 years. Nothing. Not 1%. Nothing. And that's starting to come back and hit us now. So we have to address those issues. And I know some of you in London will be very fortunate to be working for another organisation that's been very generous in its last pay award. But we can't afford that. But we've got to make sure our staff have got the skills as well. And those skills need a major, I think, program of CPD. How many of you, by the way, are industry specialists? Put your hand up. How many of you have worked in industry? Okay. When was the last time you worked in that industry? It was more than 5 years ago. What you need is a spell back there, don't you? And I don't mean 1 week. We've recently put in a bid for the EATF project for some of our staff to go back into the industry for 3 months. You should have seen the faces of the, what do you mean 3 months? They might not come back. Actually, that's a risk. I mean, I'm sure we can offer them a lot of advantages, like no pay increase, no car park. But it's also about being innovative and creative. And the most important thing is, as you think about this, is your organization one which actually rejoices in difference and diversity? Does it love you for having a different idea or coming up with something that's, a bit risky? And that's the other thing I listened to on the train. When you're trying to listen to people on the train, you pick up so much. There were 3 people obviously going to a meeting. There were college people going to a meeting with an employer in London. And it was just fascinating. You shouldn't really, you just listen in. And it was, I think my college is risk averse. I don't know how the 3 of us have managed to get on a train together down to London. This is just, unless, of course, there isn't a job for us when we get back. I mean, that's so suspicious, isn't it? Trust your organisation until I worked out where they were. That might be true, actually. But what it just told you, if you've got to have this spirit that says, You can't keep on doing the things we've always done. We're going to have to do things differently. And the most important thing to harness and release is the creativity of your staff. You do it all the time with the students, don't you? Don't you try to? And yet, when we try and do it ourselves, sometimes there's a lot of frustration. That's why our sector at the AOC, Phil, you were at the AOC, weren't you? A general feeling of, wow, it's so flat. And it didn't help when ministers, all they do is criticize you. So I think we need to say, do we do a lot of things really well? Yes. Can we do them even better? Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's so resounding good. A few of you reserve judgment. But what I think we need most is a little bit of stability where no one plays around and tinkers with another initiative. Because I think there's a danger. I believe in innovation, I believe in creativity, but my big frustration is too many initiatives at the same time just drives the energy out of you, and you feel exhausted. It's so good to see so many bright, alert people here today. What do you be like at 3 o'clock? Oh, no. Anyway, thank you very much. Are there any questions you wish to ask before we go for break? Any questions? We've got a microphone here. Any questions about any of the specifics? You can always see me if you want outside. Question at the back.
I'm coming.
Shout it out.
About the non-regulated, is there any risk if we go over a certain percentage?
The answer is no. I think the key thing is that there are myths. Remember the myths? Yeah. And the myths often came from, I'm not knocking anyone in your institution from the MI managed. Yeah. Because you know what they have to do is they have to go and find a Z code for you. The answer is no. It's got to be appropriate. And obviously one of the things that the ESFA was worried about was there was quite a big downturn in non-accredited learning. You know that, because many of you went away from it. And then suddenly it started to bounce back. But the bounce back is not worrying, because under the local flexibilities, that's really what they want you to encourage you. The key thing I would say is, can you demonstrate that some of those learners have progressed to regulated quals? That's the key thing. So using that as the stepping stone. But the other bit of evidence I think is critical is identify who you've managed to get onto that program, if it's non-accredited, and look at their backgrounds a little bit. And that provides the evidence that says you've widened participation, you're more inclusive, you're working with those people furthest away from learning. So I think that all work. So the answer is no, there's no percentage. Unless, of course, you went to 100%. It's slightly worrying, not only for your MI manager, but also for Ascentis. Or any other awarding body you might be working with. Another question or comment? Okay then, thanks very much then. Thank you.